Hello, and welcome to, hi, my name is Christy Jones, and welcome to our discussion this evening with Jade Simmons. I'm pleased to be the moderator this evening to cover many topics. This is part of a three-part series. Part one is who is Jade Simmons? So let me just take a moment to introduce her before we bring her on camera. This 2020 independent presidential candidate has led a life marked through innovation and purposeful reinvention. She's driven by a desire to influence and inspire people to make the most impact and become the biggest, boldest versions of themselves possible. She's currently living out her own advice by running for the President of the United States. She's on a mission to repair the damage that's been done to both this cultural and the spiritual fabric of America in this unprecedented age of division. Now is the time for an uncommon leadership and a different option for the American people. It is my pleasure to welcome Jade Simmons.
Hey, Christy, thank you so much for doing this with us. I'm excited to get the conversation started.
Hi, Jade, likewise. So this is a part of a three-part series, as I mentioned. So we're really gonna focus in part one about who you are, get a little personal, find out about your background, your family, what brought you here, your leadership and business, etc.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just start off and just ask you, you have lived many, many different experiences kind of as a leader in the world and in business. Can you talk about what brought you here today and how you got to this place of running for president?
Yeah, I mean, it's a loaded question. I've been trying to find out what's the nutshell version. And I think the truth of it is most of us, if we don't stop and pay attention, we'll kind of live life with all of these seemingly random detours. We'll kind of wonder how we got there. And one thing that I feel really blessed to have done is about halfway through the random detours, I started asking myself a question. What if life were actually happening for me and not happening to me? How would that change what I was experiencing? So I can think of things like not getting into Juilliard Conservatory, which was the #1 goal, which devastated me at the time. Because it was like, well, what do you do after that? I didn't get into my top school. I didn't get to play Carnegie when I was 13. All those things that you're supposed to do as a classical concert artist. And I remember originally those things were always devastating. Not winning Miss America and being first runner-up, all these almost. But as I look back, I see this very intentional thread of purpose and intentionality that once I realized that I started to do two things. I started to never be disappointed again by rejection in the same way. And I also started to then say, what if it's my job now to reinvent at various junctures? What if it's our job as people to take stock of what's going on around us, what society is crying out for, and ask ourselves, is there something I can add to the texture of this conversation, to the brilliance of this moment? How do I lean in and jump into this moment? And so that led me from being a concert pianist who would speak while she was on stage to becoming a professional speaker who now plays while she's on stage. Who also is an ordained minister who speaks and uses humor in her sermons to talk about very difficult things, including race, who wrote a book about prayer when technically I shouldn't have because I was just a musician, but that book changed a lot of lives. And when you look back and you see that fruit, Christy, you start saying, maybe we're supposed to do this. Maybe we're supposed to keep reinventing into something bigger and bolder. And that's what I help people do today. And that is what I want to help the nation do. I think we're living well underneath our potential. We are not even close to our God-given identity. And if what I do is major in the business of transformation, why not now apply that to the nation as a whole? That's the long story as short as possible.
Yeah, that's great. And under that vein, it sounds like you, as a speaker, as a concert pianist, as someone that's comfortable being on stage, leadership is innate into what you bring to that. So what I would ask is, you've been quoted as saying, leaders lead as they have lived.
Yeah.
So you've talked about a few experiences that have shaped the way you live, But how will that play into how you would lead the nation, the United States of America?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a really beautiful abstract picture that we can draw, right? Well, I'm an artist, so we need creative solutions. We must collaborate just like in an orchestra. I could easily go that route and paint that very symbolic picture, but I don't believe that we need symbolism now in leadership. When I look at how I would want a leader to lead in this era, I can tell you right now, communication is going to be key. Communication will be key. We cannot afford misinformation in this season, intentionally or otherwise, and we cannot afford to have leadership that may miss the moment or screw up the moment when communication is this vital. You think about what we have going on right now, Christy, between law enforcement and civilians. With the wrong communication, that turns into law enforcement versus civilians, which is the last thing we should be having a conversation about. This conversation should be, how do both sides commit now to protecting and serving the community like never before? That's the redirect. And if you don't have the right communication coming out of leadership's mouths in this season, it is downright dangerous. We saw that with the handling of COVID-19. We're still seeing it. So number one, I know that I bring to the table a high level of communication sensibility. We need communicators now that can hear and see between the lines. And so one of the things that I'm charged to do as I go in and speak now to billion-dollar corporations, a lot of times prestigious organizations, you can find me anywhere from kindergarten to corporate, is you have to be a communications chameleon. You have to be able to speak in a way that kindergartens can understand purpose and passion for life and potential. You have to be able to speak in a way that corporate people who are listening for the bottom line can think to, how do I lead now in a way that promotes not my own legacy, but how do I lead now down through to the legacy of the people we serve? So communication and purpose is going to be huge. In terms of leadership, we now need a leader who can not just work across the aisle when it's convenient, but who can live in the aisle. So I know you're probably going to ask the question, and I know we're going to talk about it on the next session, about what makes me, credible when I have no political experience. I honestly believe the last thing we need right now is political experience. We've had that. That's what we've had. It is why we are here. And so one of the unique things I bring to the table is nobody gets to claim me. I'm not beholden to anyone. There are no political strings attached. Yes, that comes with its own challenges in terms of forging relationships. But the difference is when I go to work with you from the aisle, you don't have to wonder if my motive is really to play to my base. You don't have to wonder if my agenda is lopsided in reality. You don't have to wonder if there are lobbyists in my ears. You don't have to wonder what my real motivation is. So I'm excited to be able to come to the table as a clean slate that will now propose solutions that are indeed creative and collaborative as well.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about living in the aisle and bringing very strong communication skills with purpose as you stand in the middle there in the aisle. You will be playing to two different sides, right? So you'll be playing to the left side, the right side, moderate sides. So how would you say that playing or living in the aisle gives you a unique advantage to speak to both of those sides?
Tremendous advantage from a trust standpoint. One of the number one things our nation is going to have to be able to do is trust what's coming out of the mouth of the leadership. And I don't care who your guy is. If you love the current president and you have 4 more years of him, you better believe you're going to have 4 more years of extreme division, because the other side will feel completely shafted for whatever reasons they may have. They will not see possibility and opportunity under the same leadership. If you switch sides and you go to someone now that we would call on the left, you're going to have people who consider themselves on the right dig their heels in. We saw this when President Obama was elected, where I think it was Mitch McConnell who said, listen, we're going to do everything we can to oppose this man. Here's what I think is so wonderfully powerful, Christy. We have Democrats that accuse me of being a closet Republican. We have Republicans that accuse me of being a closet Democrat. I think that is the best place to be, because it now means that both sides can see. I have the ability to be able to point out that common ground. I would say because of many of my personal beliefs, there are a lot of people who consider themselves Republican or conservative who will hear their voice and mine because of my viewpoints when it comes to how we serve all of humanity, whether or not they believe like we do or look like we do. There are a lot of people on the left who are saying that speaks to my heart. So I think we have an opportunity now to do things tremendously differently in a powerful way that we at Operation Restoration say will always prioritize people over profit, over political agendas, over personal gain every single time. That's what the American people want to really know, is that they are the priority.
Mm-hmm. So as you talk about being able to appeal to both, all of the bases, right, two in particular, but there are as a spectrum,
Right.
it leads me to think about, you know, the real point of this conversation, or real kind of heart of it, is kind of telling us about who you are.
Yeah.
And you have a very strong family background. And I'd love to hear more about your family. I know you're married to your high school sweetheart, for example, and help us understand that story as well. And then we can talk about how that strong family background helps appeal to most American families.
Thank you, Christy. If I'm not careful, I'll get up on one of my many soapboxes and talk politics all night. But I know members of the Operation Restoration team have been saying the questions that they get asked behind the scenes are, you know, we also just want to know who she is. So I'm glad we're having this moment. I am married to my high school sweetheart. We've been together since we were 15 years old. Now we're both from Charleston, South Carolina. He's threatened to pop in tonight. In everything. So we'll see if he makes an appearance. But, you know, we met in high school and have been together ever since. He went off into the military right after high school. I went to Northwestern University. So we were together 8.5 years before we were finally married. And we now have two kids. My son is 12 years old and my daughter is 6. And so when we talk about what we all have been going through with COVID-19, listen, we're doing the homeschooling over here. We've really been leaning into the lockdown. We saw an incredible silver lining in terms of just family time. My career before I launched into this campaign really was one that kept me on the road a lot. And so it was nice to really be home, to have church at home, to worship at home with my family. Here in Houston, I'm a proud member of the church that we attend. I was the most recently the former women's pastor at my church, and I'm one of the speaking pastors as well. And I mentioned writing a book on prayer. My faith is extremely important to me, and contrary to conventional wisdom where politics is concerned, I speak very openly about my faith because I believe transparency is important. I want people to know what our source is, but we have a lot of fun here.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, and speaking openly about faith and writing a book on prayer and really leading from a strong Christian position, how do you think that will help you lead a country, that is very diverse and represents a lot of different backgrounds?
Yeah, you know, I think the thing that will have to be reconciled right away is the notion of what a faith-based leader is. One of the reasons that I run so openly on my faith, quite honestly, is because I am appalled at how my faith has been hijacked. And when I look at the representation that is being given to me, forced on me, as what it means to be a Christian. And I'm talking very openly now about what republicanism has turned into in some facets, not everyone. But I don't see my faith in that. And to me, to come out and not speak about my faith means that I then allow there to be a representation that I don't agree with to be forced on me. When anybody finds out that I am Christian, they'll say, oh, you're just like President Trump. You're just like evangelicals. So the reason I'm open is so that people can see what it means to me to be a faith-based leader. What does that mean? Well, the Christianity that I practice, when I look at the model of Jesus himself and look at who he was amongst, he was honestly rarely amongst people who believed like him. And he was there to offer hope. He was there to offer light. And he also said some hard truths. He didn't always agree with people in what he considered to be their sin, right? But he still did not withhold love. And what I think we need to see from a faith-based leader is what I call honor. There's a pastor who I've only recently become acquainted with, and the way that he teaches on honor is one of the most brilliant ways I've ever heard. And he says, honor, we get it confused with agreement. So we think if we honor someone, it must mean we agree. Right? So it then disables us to have productive, powerful, love-based conversations. But he says honor is actually best used in places of disagreement, because you start from this base level of, listen, we may never define marriage in the same way. We may never agree on whether abortion is right or wrong. But at the end of the day, it's literally in the word of God to honor every man and woman. And so I think it would be powerful to see someone be strong in their conviction. So let me say also, Christy, what the reason we see such a hardcore version of faith on one side is because for many years, Christians have also gone voiceless. That as the year has evolved, as the society has evolved, as we've gotten more liberties for different demographics, what you've seen is that people who have had hard, wrought convictions, things that they have practiced in there, a part of their household, a part of their ethics, are now also being told, if you believe this way, there's something wrong with you. So what we saw was a consolidation of people who said, my faith is important to me, and it is being dismissed on the other side. It is being discounted. It is even being condescended to. And so we're seeing a leaning in of people who I believe are having to actually sacrifice their true morality in favor of moral agenda, of power, and having a voice. And so we really believe that my candidacy allows people who've been feeling like, my beliefs don't really sit well on either side. So we're hoping that with me, they're hearing, what, that sounds more like where I stand. It sounds like the Christianity that I've been practicing. And it also gives them, people I believe that are, let's say, on the far right, who say, I don't really agree with this president. I don't like the way that he presents himself, but I could never vote far left. And you have those on the left who said, listen, there are things we don't agree with over here, but I could never vote for what I consider to be racism or what I consider to be chauvinism. So I'm staying put. And we believe that we not only give a place in the middle, but that we give a whole new highway for people who do believe powerfully, but also are willing to love powerfully as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And leading, and you mentioned, living in the aisle and having that honor and seeing honor as allowing space for disagreement. Yeah, would definitely serve powerfully, especially in the deep division that the country finds itself in today.
Yeah.
I wanted to just ask you a little bit about, you talked about you married your high school sweetheart. Yeah. We talked about you having 2 children, one's 12 and one's 6, a boy and a girl, and was really wondering, obviously you guys have been through so much over the years, becoming parents, husband, wife, etc., and building businesses, which we'll get into in a little while. But, with your husband, how has he responded to you, really taking this on, and how do you think he would show up as you being the leader of the free world?
Anybody who knows him knows all the reasons I'm laughing and smiling right now. My husband is, so we're the opposite in terms of how we present externally, right? If I'm the extrovert, he's the extreme introvert in many ways. He's very comfortable being a behind the scenes, man of mystery, man of few words type personality, silent, strong type. I went to him. You have to remember, we've been together so long, Christy. So he's been with me through all the iterations. He remembers when my dream was just to be a classical concert pianist. And it was him who, and I always joke that I almost left him. He didn't know at the time, but he said to me, he said one night I was struggling with something musically, and classical music is an extremely competitive industry. And I was frustrated for some reason. And he said, Jade, I don't think piano is going to be like your thing. And I remember going, wait, hold on a second. I've been doing this longer than I've known you, sir. Like, this is the only thing on the table. And I was offended, Christy. I was like, he doesn't believe in me. He's doubting me. And I remember him saying, hold on. All I'm saying is, I don't think that's going to be it. He said, I think the piano will be the thing that opens the doors. And it sounds so wonderfully philosophical now, but back then I just heard it as, you don't think I can do what I, because, the overachievers, we had one goal at top of the list, that's it. And he was so right. When I look at every avenue I have gone down, the piano was the thing that opened the door. Every time, if I allowed it, it would broaden the impact. There's this incredible scripture about your gift making room for you. And so that piano, which I'm actually seated right next to, is the thing that has got me in the most unexpected rooms. And I can honestly say, had it not been for the piano, I wouldn't have been invited in that room. The piano ended up being the thing that diversified me from my competition in every arena. And even today now, as an artist, there's a very different perspective I bring even into the world of politics. Understanding what it takes to really make music in this season. We've got a din of unrest right now that is ringing so loudly. But what people don't really get, I don't know, I hope they do, is that there's really a small window to make something of that noise. Or else it stays noise, it fades away. We get desensitized to noise, right? Right now, while it's a shock, we have to do something shocking. And I believe it's that we have to make a new move. So the original question, my husband, we've been trying to figure out, what do you call it? Is it the first man? Is it the first guy? We have fun just talking about it at home. But the one thing he said to me when I went to him and said, this is what I'm thinking is next. And this is, let people know, this is not something we woke up yesterday and decided. This was something as a family, my family had known about for a few years. The timing did surprise us. I know we'll talk about that later. But I went to him and I said, sweetie, you can tell me, am I crazy? Like, surely you'll tell me if I'm crazy. And he looked at me and he said, every time you felt led to do something like this, you've always been right about it. It's always been the right thing to do at the moment. He said, we would be irresponsible now to think this was the one time you weren't hearing correctly. And that settled it for me, because I knew that man who's been with me when I decided to go from classical music to rapping would tell me if I had fallen and hit my head. He would let me know. So his faith in me and getting to, get off of calls like this and go back to him every night and know that he still knows who I am, no matter how nasty the comments get, the accusations that come in. There's something incredibly grounding that I have in him that I know will be so crucial in the White House, especially.
Absolutely. So sticking to the theme of your family as we get to, really just to know you, let's talk a little bit about your parents. I know that classical piano was something that you were raised with, and they encouraged you and really stood behind you in many ways. But talk a little bit about how your parents, from as early as you can remember, helped influence you as you moved through the world, and how those lessons have helped you today.
Yeah, I think it would be easy to imagine that since my initial career was in classical music, you could think you could imagine what my childhood was like or what my parents were like, and you'd be really wrong. My parents are incredible. My father's a civil rights activist, still located in Charleston, South Carolina. And my mother has worked in higher education all of her life. And the way that I was raised was whatever I wanted to try or do, they supported me in it. So I ended up playing 7 instruments before the years were over. I played 3 or 4 sports, was the overachieving kid, student body president, drum major, wrote the cadences in the drum line. I mean, your typical overscheduled American student. Like my Russian and Korean friends were like, we could never do this growing up. We had to pick one thing. And my parents never made me pick, because, and I think also this was something intrinsic in the way that Black families raised kids of my era. We were taught you had to do all these things. You had to run faster. You had to jump higher in order to be either considered equal or to achieve. So because of my father's work, race was something that was spoken about very candidly, very openly. And my parents did a lot to assure opportunity and access. So my mother knew to sign me up for all the advanced classes. She would tell me things like, Jade, if you hear them call the top 3 students down to the office, you go as well. And I graduated number 12. We all tracked our GPAs and everything. And we were all, points apart. And she knew that they were being called to the office to be offered scholarship opportunities. And I would go every time their name was called. And the guidance counselor was like, we didn't call you. I'm like, that's okay. I'm here anyway. And I would go through the same applications as they did. And I ended up having the most scholarships in the history of my high school. But it was because of the privilege of having a mother who knew. She knew how things were done. Now, you would think with a father like mine, I'd have this chip on my shoulder. I'd see racism and everything. And he always says, I don't have to, because it's sort of his job. He's from the era where you look for these things, you're circumspect, you lead from a place of, let's see if they're going to do this right. It allows me to come in, see potential, see purpose, see opportunity, and make a judgment call in the moment. So my mother, I would say, was really integral in the development of my faith. It took me from being someone who just went to church to someone who understood you could build a relationship with God. And my father, I would say, is crucial in the sense of, if you see something that needs to be fixed and you have the power to fix it, you must do something about it. You must. And so between the two of them, maybe this this moment was inevitable in many ways.
Yes, that's lovely. So, I find it very interesting that you talked about your family, your father being a civil rights activist, race being a key issue of civil rights, even today in 2020. As well as you talked a little bit about the noise that's happening right now today, and that there's a window of opportunity. We're sitting in that window right now.
That's right.
So as you think about everything that brought you here, and we'll talk a little bit more, but what we talked about so far, and who you are, and all that has fortified you to be here right now, we would be remiss not to mention the race issues that are happening in the world today, and specifically the United States. So how do you think all of the things that you've talked about and your current position, your communication style, your focus on purpose and trust, et cetera, really positions you to take on such a large issue as what we're facing right now with racial tensions in the U.S.?
When we, my family and I, and my team decided this was the time and this was the moment, we'd be lying if we said we knew COVID-19 was going to hit how it did, and that George Floyd's murder would start when it started. I think we have to be honest about a couple of things. I can't promise you we would have this response to George Floyd's murder if we were not on lockdown. I think being at a place where we could not turn our eyes, it's hard to say, but it really was nothing new. This had happened before, and it didn't spark this reaction. And so I don't believe in coincidence. I believe this moment had to be what it is for us to make the moves that we need to make. And I do feel uniquely capable of speaking on it. The president is either incapable or unwilling to speak in a way that would unify, that would validate the hurts and the pains of those who are talking about racism and systemic racism, and also say, listen, we need to find powerful ways to reform policing. He has a habit of taking these sides that he knows will invigorate a part of his base. I'm very careful because I know and love people who are Republican. I know and love people who are Democrat, and I try to speak with honor when I talk about voters. because we don't know everybody's motivation. I'm not one who believes that everyone who voted for President Trump is racist. That's short-sighted. It's not helpful. And so when I think about the moment, I can't see anything in his past and anything in his current that tells us he's going to be able to talk us through this, where we're going to get reform and restoration and reconciliation and long-term resolution. When I think about Vice President Joe Biden, I think we definitely see a milder personality that may quell a little bit of the unrest. I do wonder if he will feel empowered to speak with the intensity needed. This is not an era of gradualism, Christy. We can't take breadcrumbs right now. People say, well, what do you mean we? Listen, I think we have an era now where I can boldly say, I would be proud to be a president to all people. I believe that is the God-identified way that a president should operate. I also think we have to say, we don't need a cheerleader right now that's going to tell us things are great when they're not. We also don't need chicken soup that's just going to make us feel better. We don't deserve to feel better right now. We have to feel this pain, absorb it, and then do something with it. So I believe we need a champion. And I do believe that African Americans, uniquely in this moment, need a champion to speak for them powerfully. And I think both candidates, for various reasons that we talked about earlier in terms of being beholden to certain sides, they can't say things a certain way. As an independent candidate, I have the freedom. I don't have to worry about my political career. I don't have to worry about re-election. I don't have to pander to anyone, and I don't have to hold back. And so I will say that it is long overdue in this country that African Americans see breakthrough. We don't need our voices lifted. We don't need symbolic progress. We need breakthrough in this season. And so I know we'll talk policy in later sessions, but what I'm so excited about is we're crafting these sets of policy called Shades of Breakthrough. And there is very specifically plans that are called Breakthrough for Black America. There's also Breakthrough for Native Americans. There's also Breakthrough for small business owners. So you have all these different layers who have gone underserved and who have carried more burden than others. And what I think is important now is we need someone who can say what I would like to have people hear me say, is that as we elevate groups that have been historically, systemically underserved, it does not equal the overthrow of people who have had privilege. And that's not the discussion we're hearing. We're hearing all or nothing, black or white, down with one side or down with the other. That's not the rhetoric that's going to get us to where we truly can operate at our best. And so it excites me. Is that crazy to say? This moment excites me because I do feel uniquely tailor-made to speak into it. And I know that I can come from a place of compassion and love, but I don't say those words as soft skills, which we can maybe talk about later. I see those as the strongest skill sets we need to be able to lead with right now.
Right, and we can see that globally. We have several female leaders of many countries. New Zealand has a very strong female prime minister and has led the country through some very difficult moments with compassion. And there's been great success. There's actually studies that show that. So as a mother, just before we leave this topic, and we're going to move on to small business in just a moment, but as a mother and as a woman in leadership, how would you speak to the country as they all heard, his last words calling for his mother?
I have been really leaning into a birthing analogy for this moment in the nation. Women have the unique ability to give birth. It's not always going to be biological children. Sometimes we are spiritual mothers. We are mentors. We're coaches. This moment to me requires a midwife. All of us who have delivered know the value or the horror of a bad nurse or midwife in the birthing process. And I think that's where we are. We're in those final birth pains, but also everyone who's given birth will tell you the moment the baby arrives, it's like the pain you went through, we still can't really explain it, just goes out the window. And I think that's where we stand, Christy, that in this moment, it would be my honor to help us birth into this new era. And I think the new baby, which is so ironic, I was telling the team today, the thing we're trying to get to is the thing we've been saying we were. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We all had to say that in school. We put our hand over our hearts and we quoted that. But I think we're looking around now and going, it's really nice messaging. But wouldn't it be great to actually look like that? And I think we have to lean in together to get there. I think this moment is different than the past. My parents, who were in the marches of the 60s and 70s, they're having mixed reactions as they watch this. My father is happy to see people back out in the streets because he never left. And mostly he's in the streets by himself, fighting for people that are not standing with him. And he's fighting for people while they're going about their life. My mother, who's been in these marches, looks at it a little bit with like, well, I hope this really leads to something new, because she knows the pain of the noise and that it not quite getting to where it needs to go. So my pledge to the nation now is to be able to serve as a mom who knows the pain and the struggle of birthing, but also believes in the beauty of it. And I think in this season, we must have a midwife who can lean in. And like all moms do, we keep unity in the house. Between kids that don't look alike, don't act alike, you wonder if they all came from you. We as moms figure out how to have peace in the household. And I think that's what this moment is calling for.
Absolutely. So, speaking on the topic of women and small business, there have been studies throughout the globe that are also true here, that when women are part of the fabric, the socioeconomic fabric of the nation, it's stronger, the economy is stronger, growth is stronger. Mm-hmm. And a lot of small business owners are made up of women and obviously men as well. You have been a small business owner, and I'd love to hear a little bit, before you talk about how you have a breakthrough plan for your business owners, talk about your journey as a small business owner and things you've learned along the way, and areas that you wish that you had had support from the government.
Wow, that's a whole other session too, isn't it? Which I think we're doing a listening tour stop specifically on small business because it is something I'm passionate about. I've gone from being a solopreneur, professional DIYer. I've done anything that I am now paying somebody else to do in my business. I have done it, and so I started out as a freelance artist. And nobody teaches you how to do that. You go to school to learn Beethoven and Chopin, and then nobody tells you how to actually make a living playing Beethoven and Chopin. And I remember being just a student of enterprise. I studied Apple, Oprah Winfrey, and Michael Jordan. No classical musicians. I studied these people in the corporate and commercial world. And I learned a lot about branding and marketing and creating an experience. And my music career took off when I decided to stop playing piano recitals and create these concert adventures instead. And so my audience began to diversify. I no longer had the very traditional, all white, older audience. I had a very diverse audience. Some came for the Mozart, some came for the electronic beats, some came for the rap, and they all had this wonderful experience together. And once I started speaking in my concerts, that actually turned into an entire career in speaking. And now I am very proud to be one of the more sought after female corporate speakers. And you talk about understanding pay equity. That was a study in understanding my worth and what I brought to the table. And I would look around and see my male peers getting paid a lot more than I was getting paid. And I knew I was leaving more on the stage. I was delivering in a bigger way. So I learned a lot about packaging and how to present that value, and was able then to elevate my pay to the status of my male counterparts. And so I understand the climb that a small business owner has to make. I went from being my only employee to, at our greatest over the last summer, having about 10 people under the umbrella that is Jade Media Global. And now I had to weather what everybody else was weathering. When COVID-19 hit, our bulk of our revenue is in large gatherings. being able to gather by the thousands, and literally overnight, we were technically out of business in many ways. And so we lost 6 figures in the span of about a week. And for a small business, that's a very big deal. And so just like everyone else, we applied for small business loans. And I lamented when we saw the loopholes exacerbated and we saw small businesses left out. So a lot of the plans that I have are helping to put small businesses first now and to serve small business. You can't just stretch small businesses and do things like raise the minimum wage and not reward small businesses. So I'm passionate about it because I currently live it. And any small business owner will tell you, we lose sleep at night, not about our salary. We lose sleep over the livelihood of the people who are serving us in our business. And we will give up whatever we have to make sure they're okay. And so I want to make sure that government is doing what it needs to make sure small businesses are okay.
And how do you think specifically the direct experience of being a small business owner, having grown your business over the years, how do you think that would directly apply to you being the president of the United States?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, there's so many stories that I could tell about what I learned along the way in terms of taxes, in terms of the things that I wish someone had taught me at the beginning of the business. The organizations that it took me forever to know I needed to join to really see benefits and resources. And just so many small businesses, we're kind of winging it in the beginning. We're faking it until we make it. And so I would love to see more support built into those early phases that, there's a hot phenomenon of coaching, but that's not always affordable. I would love to have government that's offering those same sorts of resources for businesses in that infancy stage so that when we have something like COVID-19 happen, small businesses are farther along. I mean, everybody was caught and hit pretty hard here, including the big corporations. But I'd love to see more support systems put in for small businesses to be able to survive, not just survive, but to be able to thrive.
Excellent. And like you mentioned, you do have some listening tours coming up that specifically focus on certain issues, including small business.
Right.
And I'll share a little bit about that at the end as well.
Sure.
So we've gotten a good taste of who you are as a woman, as a mother, as a business owner, as a leader, as a speaker. And I'd like to talk a little bit about leadership.
Sure.
We've had, 45 presidents, lots of leadership throughout the government, throughout the country. In your experience, who is your favorite leader that you aspire to, and how would you draw some of the inspiration from that leader in your role as president?
I'm going to give a very cliche and expected answer as a Christian, and that I draw very heavily from the figure of Christ. And what I am drawing is a couple of things. You have to be able to serve people without always being influenced by all the people all the time. That even in times like we are in right now, you have to be able to listen to what's going on around you and hear for yourself. We have to decide how this moment affects us. We can't have people telling us how to process what's happening. And so to me, as I look at the figure of Christ, I see a couple of things that he did regularly. One was that he was very measured in how he spoke. He was never speaking from a place of emotion. I think we could use that right about now, because words, once they're out there, that's it. They're in the news cycle. They take on a life of their own. I also love that from a leadership perspective, Jesus was always developing talent. It was never just about him. It was God, and it was never just about him. Here he was developing talent. And so I think of each of the disciples and how common they were. They didn't have these long resumes. Maybe Luke had the, biggest resume as a doctor. But each of them were different people after being under his leadership. And I think we're in a season now where we have to decide, do we want leaders who are looking to elevate themselves, or do we want leaders who will elevate the people around them and elevate people in the nation and elevate the nation itself? We are in a tremendous PR crisis where the U.S. is concerned. Our allies and our enemies are watching. And you better believe they are taking copious notes. And so now, whether we like it or not, our leadership reflects how people see the people. If you don't believe me, you think about China. When we say that word, we have an image, and it's almost always attached to the leaders of China. We rarely think about the individual people. And that's how important this is. Whoever is at the top reflects now the image of the nation. So when I think about Christ, the third thing that he always did was he pulled away. He went away by himself to hear and to get clear. And I'll tell you, if you have a team like mine that's full of brilliant people, and you're trying to pray this thing out and listen up, you're going to have to pull away and remember a couple of things. What's my original mission here? It'd be really easy for me right now as a Black female, Christy, to go, you know what? My new mission, and just to jump all on, I'm only here to serve African Americans. It would be very easy to make that pitch. My dad's civil rights, I'm made for this race debate, and I could lean that way very easily. I have to go back and remember the original mission was not only to be a spokesperson for one demographic. It was to engender restoration throughout the nation, to repair what's been ripped to shreds because of racism, because of division. That means that I don't have the luxury of leaning into my emotion this day, even if it's justified. I still have to stay clear. But I also have to adjust, what is this moment calling for? And it's why I say I do believe African Americans need a champion in this moment. And I can be that champion without throwing to the wayside the needs of other demographics that have been underserved, the needs of the middle class, understanding the purpose and the intention of the wealthy. I don't believe in demonizing any side. And so when I look at Christ as the model, that kind of keeps me centered in terms of remembering your original mission and keeping focused all the way to the end goal.
So you are a woman, a mother, a small business owner, a leader, an artist, trained pianist. You are also willing to stand in the aisle, to live in the aisle. From that position, you would likely get quite a bit of criticism from all sides.
Yeah.
How would you respond to the deep criticism that comes as you stand in the position of being the leader of the free world?
Well, we're already getting the criticism. And if anybody wants to see how we would respond, I would ask you to go look at how we have been responding. I have directed our team that we always try to communicate in an uncommon way. Listen, it's very difficult as a professional speaker with a quick wit and a sharp tongue not to respond from my gut every time I see something. And so I've developed 3 ways of responding. One is to never explain to whoever is listening out there. When you know that you are on mission and you have marching orders that did not come from man, you also don't sit down because of man's directive. And so if you remember what your mission is and that it wasn't people who gave it to you in the first place, you keep marching. So we know that we keep moving. We believe that only worthy opponents are worthy to be opposed. And so sometimes I ask people questions. When people say, I saw someone concerned about viability, the biggest early criticism we got was, this isn't even impossible. Why are you doing this? You're going to screw up what we're trying to do, which is from a side that's saying, look, the only thing we need to do is get rid of the current president. And some people will say, you're going to split the vote. My question is, which vote are we splitting? Are we splitting the status quo vote? Are we splitting a vote that will keep us in the same position as we've always been in? Is it a vote that we need to consider rallying around something else? We always say, if we had a vote for everyone who said, I'm an independent, but, we would win by landslide. I vote for women, but I don't care that you're Black, but if we had all of those but commenters voting, we would win very easily. I think the other thing to keep in mind when you look at kind of the criticism is we are looking for what the root of the criticism is. And the root is always fear. It's a couple of levels of fear. We see one side saying, hey, don't do this. You're going to cause him to win again. Well, that's fear of the president, which means he is still controlling your options and your vote. On the other side, we get stop. America's already what it needs to be. We don't need you. Well, that's fear of change. It's fear that if other groups begin to rise, I might be taken down and overthrown. And then we see personal fear. When people come at me very personally and say things like, sit your beat down, or who do you think you are? I've always understood that to mean that's not about me. That is someone looking at what I'm doing. They can't see themselves doing it. They can't imagine themselves stepping out in this way. They can't imagine where they would get the resources, where they would find the wisdom to do it. And so since they look at me and see themselves, they criticize it. So when we understand that, the one directive that I've had consistently is to bless people. So if you look at my comments, you will see a lot of blessing. I declare really positive things over a lot of people. And sometimes I do call things out for what they are. But we have been saying we want to respond uncommonly because it is a reflection of how we will communicate in the White House as well.
Wonderful. So just kind of circling back to where we started, our intention today as part of this 3-part series, part 1 is to answer the question, who is Jade Simmons?
Yeah.
People have listened to you talk about many different facets of your life and how you got where you are today. But if you were to have them walk away with 2 or 3 key points that you would want them to hold on to when they answer the question for themselves, who is Jade Simmons, what would those be?
I'd want them to really ask a slightly different question. Not so much, who am I, but what do you want the next leader to be? Make a list of the characteristics. How would you want them to lead? What would you want their track record to show in terms of how they have served people? What would you want them to believe about people? And then go say, is Jade that person? Does she have those traits? Because if you start from who is Jade, we end up in the same mess, Christy, where we begin to elevate personality over what's really important. So we ask people, ask yourselves what you want prioritized. Do you want to see people put above politics every single time? Not just when it's convenient. Do you want to see people prioritized over profit every single time, right? Not when it's going to be about lining that politician's pockets. Do you want to see people prioritized over games every time? And if your answers are yes, and you see the characters that you want in me, then consider us for real. People keep asking about viability. It's only not viable. It's only not viable until it is viable, right? I mean, as soon as we say this is what we choose, suddenly it's viable. Suddenly it's the easiest thing in the world. But we have to get beyond our fear and not focus on things like viability first. Focus on truth, what we want, and do we see it? And if so, get behind that. And when you get behind that, suddenly it's as viable as any other option out there.
Great. So you're running a series, the MTC series, or Meet the Candidate, where people will be able to invite you into their home. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Because people will want to know who you are and get personal.
Those have been my favorite. So basically, thanks to Zoom and video technology, we're campaigning behind the scenes right in people's living rooms. So we have people who say, listen, I like your platform. I think that was Latoya. She said, I like your platform, but viability is my concern. She'd be the perfect candidate to host a Meet the Candidate event. It's a private closed session with me and your inner circle or your church friends or whoever. And you get to not just hear me talk at you, but you get to ask me questions. And Christy, they come for me in these sessions because they want to know, listen, it sounds good. You look good. The website is nice, but can you lead? How would you beat this? How would you handle this? And so it gives us a private moment to ask those questions. And what we're finding is that whenever we have these, there's always a tremendous shift from beginning to end. People who didn't see the viability see it by the end. We've had people who came on kind of hands crossed, who end up saying, okay, I'm glad I got to speak to the next president, right? So, the ulterior motive is that when the media begins to open up to us, Christy, when we're finally have broken through that kind of wall of silence that we're experiencing now, we want it so that when you see me on Fox News, CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, there are people in America that says, I've sat with her for an hour. I know her heart. So that when the spin happens, when the news cycles begin, there are individuals who can say, no, I had a moment with her. I remember what she said about why she's running with her faith out front. So when anybody paints it differently, there are individuals who know differently in their heart and can be able to speak for themselves and understand for themselves who I am. So we're excited for more people to do that. We don't have to have a relationship already. It's the perfect time to build relationship and for people to ask the questions they really want to ask.
Wonderful. And we just have one final question. As a classical pianist, if you're sitting in the Oval Office, will you have a piano in the Oval Office with you?
I love that question. So I've done some research and there's already a piano there, but it's a Steinway. I am a Yamaha artist, so my hope would be we would bring in a brand new CFX 9-footer and put that in there's a room where the piano is already. And I definitely think I will need to have that as a bit of a decompressor across from the Oval Office. So I love the idea of having music there. And I love the idea of having musicians come and perform more often at the White House as well.
That's wonderful. Well, it's been very nice getting to know you. Thank you for telling us all about you and your background and sharing your how you got here as well as your family, some about your family as well.
Thank you so much, Christy. You've been wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Great. So as we talked about, we do have a series called Meet the Candidate, where you can invite Jade into your home via, with the COVID-19 restrictions, we can do this obviously through streaming platforms. And there are also a series of listening tours that cover many different topics such as healthcare, economics, small business, several of the hot topics and really critical issues that the US is facing today. And you can see this as well as the other series streaming live on Operation Restoration, the website, as well as on YouTube. So what we'd like for you to do is mark your calendars for next Monday. That would be June 22nd at the same time. And we're going to answer the question of, is she qualified? So again, it'll be a live conversation with Jade. And between now and then, we invite you to please go check out more information on operationrestoration2020.com. You can also text RESTORE to 33777. Again, that's RESTORE to 33777. And if you're really interested in meeting the candidate, go ahead and text MTC to 33777 for more details. Thank you for joining us this evening.